Hey, what's up, metal and heavy music fans? It's Flight of Icarus again with MetalTrenches.com, and it's time to review Swedish melodic death metal stalwarts Dark Tranquillity's 12th album Moment via Century Media Records. And hey, if you like to be kept up to date with the best and brightest metal bands and albums from the underground and above, then stick with me by hitting that subscribe button down below. I can't believe it's already been 4 years since this band, one of my favorites of all time, dropped the Grammy-nominated Atoma, an album that I loved to tears and actually ranked in my top 4 albums, falling short only of the incredible trilogy of Damage Done, Character, and Fiction on my discography tier list. Moment is the first album since Dark Tranquillity's inception to not feature lead guitarist Niklas Sundin, with Chris Amet of Arch Enemy fame and Johan Reinholds of Non-Exist taking over with admittedly big shoes to fill. And while it was apparent right from the early singles that Niklas' sonic fingerprint is sorely missing from Moment's overall sound, the duo have done a fine job of keeping the band's overall spirit alive while adding some new flourishes of their own. And speaking of the singles, I must say that I was fairly underwhelmed going into this album, as may have been apparent from the respective reaction and track reviews I put up as they came out. Aside from lacking some of the instantly captivating riffs that had me right from the start with Atoma, the somewhat overall generic and forgettable songwriting left me wanting in general. You've got to understand, gang, like I said, this is one of my favorite bands of all time, and really the one that got me into death metal to begin with. So my expectations tend to be on the high side. It's not so much that I thought the tracks were bad, more so they just didn't really reach the bar that I've set for them over the past 18 or so years.
My God, has it been that long?
Now that said, I'm happy to say that many of these tracks ended up being growers over time. Phantom Days in particular, though still not reaching the same memorable heights of the likes of Monochromatic Stains, Lost to Apathy, or The Pitiless, found me getting a lot more into it with each listen. The riffs here are more than serviceable for headbanging, and I particularly love that synth part that first pops up around the 1 minute mark. If any one member is truly in their element on this album, it's definitely Martin. Identical to None, I initially laughed with the many rightly joking in terms of songwriting that this is actually identical to Many, and would not have been among my choices for a single. Again, ironically, it lacks a truly distinct personality in comparison to past works, but I can't deny that the chorus did start to get to me. I caught myself more and more rasping along to it, seeing my reflection in my screen contorting into metal face. Hey, there's always something to be said for that. But of the three, The Dark Unbroken was the track that stood out the most from the pack from the very beginning. While I tend to gravitate the most towards Dark Tranquillity's faster, heavier material, I have to admit that the slower, more textured approach of this track lent itself well to leaving a more lasting impact. This one is positively soaked in thick, melancholic atmosphere that seems to come at you from every direction. The traditional piano paired with the admittedly solid guitar and vocal hooks make for a more thoughtful experience, and of course with Chris and Johan on board, we knew we'd be getting some pretty killer solos to boot. The first of many, really. But honestly, it's the deeper cuts on Moment that really get me going. Transient was the first and real favorite to jump out at me from the track listing, deeply satisfying my aforementioned hunger for those earworm riffs that seem to lodge themselves deep in your brain like Khan's ear larva from Star Trek. This one has a seriously catchy chorus that definitely gets my head bobbing along and screaming out those vocals. I love how the chuggy rhythm guitar punctuates the groove so perfectly under the very ethereal layering of the leads. Highly infectious stuff. Ego Deception and A Drawn Out Exit were other easy favorites early on with their energetic pace, the latter arguably being the most aggressive track on the album. This one has a fantastic intro with Anders' bass rumbling front and center. It sounds like a very ominous storm cloud rolling in, complete with actual thunderclaps, mind you. This ultimately building into more great riffage and some of the more evil sounding vocals Moment has to offer. Very heavy, dark stuff that should also be a real crowd pleaser live. And rounding out the tracks that seem worthy of giving individual attention, Remain in the Unknown should make the list as well. Honestly, I'm still not 100% sure about how I feel about this track, but it definitely stands out as something that feels fresh and different for Dark Tranquillity with its more hopeful, positive sounding melodies. The moody, clean sung intro reminds me a lot of something off of Projector. It's a bit of a sappy track to be sure, but then again, I'm the guy at the show on the verge of tears belting out Therein in the front row, and who actually considers Day to End to be a bit of a guilty pleasure. So hey, bring on the cheese and some wine to go with it. Shifting my thoughts back to the album as a complete work, stylistically it feels kind of like a cross between Fiction and Construct, featuring the pretty even mix of harsh and dramatic approaches of the former with the focus on thick atmosphere of the latter. Many of these tracks really highlight lots of contrast between the light and dark side of this band that has always been present but in varying degrees from album to album. And like I said, Martin's keyboards seem to shine above all else on this one. Between his work here and Hakon's on Enslaves Utgard, it seems that 2020 has been a good year for great synth, extending also to Greg Puciato's solo album and the latest singles from the Smashing Pumpkins. Now that said, even after many re-listens, I would rank this one maybe just a little higher than Construct and in the same bracket with We Are the Void. Most of the tracks took a lot longer to sink in, and even then they lacked the same visceral connection and impact of Dark Tranquillity's best albums. Sometimes I feel like part of the problem is the guitar tone and maybe the mixing, but in any case I predict that this will end up being a divisive record with people like myself who come first and foremost for the classic Gothenburg hooks finding themselves a bit disappointed, while those more inclined towards their ability to build massive waves of moody atmosphere loving it. Me personally, I give it an 8 for enjoyability. There's still some great content here from my personal taste, and even the more lukewarm stuff remains pretty consistent. But even the most high-octane riffs and admittedly ripping solos can't hold a candle to my favorites. I do give it a 9 for musicianship. All the performances here are very strong, once more looking at you, Martin, and both Chris and Johan have a bright future ahead in this band moving forwards. And I give it a 7 for innovation. The songwriting is extremely typical for the genre without any real glimmer of surprise save for maybe Remain in the Unknown. So a flat 8 overall and a B- for Dark Tranquillity and Moment. Get it once more via Century Media Records. So now if you're asking yourself, okay, so if you don't think this is so great, what melodith do you think is better this year? That's you. That's what you sound like. But serious though, without hesitation, Moore's Principium Est knocked it out of the effing park this year with 7. So if you missed my review of that one, be sure to check it out. Even if you thought this album was a perfect 10, I still think you'll enjoy that one as well. In any case, thanks as always for watching, and let me know what you thought of this album in the comments, as well as your favorite Dark Tranquillity album. For me, it's still damage done even after all of these years. That'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.